But now I am excited to introduce Mike Kelly.
Evening. Hey, everybody. Really excited to be here tonight and the opportunity to speak. Maybe this might actually become like a master class in Citizens United because I'm going to talk a little bit about history and then go into some of the solutions that are being worked. A lot of people don't know about all the different solutions. There's a lot of people out there really worried about the Citizens United decision and are actually working really hard to make some progress and reverse it. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about Citizens United. The Supreme Court decided the infamous court case back in 2010. And as you can imagine, it opened up the floodgates. And there are some estimates that not only is it costing like 10 times the amount that it used to cost to run for an office, but it's actually trickled down now in recent years to local elections. Basically, the Supreme Court said, you know what, corporations do have a First Amendment, a right of freedom of speech, and that money is considered speech. And some of the justices after that decision said, you know what, the reason part of us came up with that decision was we felt transparency would keep the campaign finance amounts in check. Well, that was a bunch of bull because there's hardly any transparency laws in place to make that happen. And so it's actually gone crazy. For example, a year or two ago in, I believe it was Ohio, like $40 million was spent on one Senate race. And I'm sure this year there were some records broken in the amount of money spent for Congress positions this year. But let's get on. Let's move on to like solutions. And I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 solutions today and about things that are going on in parallel. One of them has to do with the national congressional amendment efforts. Another one has to do with an effort in Maine, an effort in Hawaii, very recent. And then finally, a nationwide constitutional convention effort that we are going to talk about today. And then there's a fifth thing I want to talk about, an organization that has actually had some success in doing something similar to that Project Leapfrog is trying to do. Okay, as president and executive director of Project Leapfrog, I'm really proud to be here tonight to talk to you about these various solutions and hope you will support all of them in their efforts to overturn Citizens United. The first one, let's talk about the national congressional legislation. The most famous is Move to Amend is an organization that pushed the We the People Amendment. We the People Amendment has been submitted to Congress, I believe, every year for the last about 15 years without any success. The reason for that is generally only about 110 congressmen vote in favor of it, whereas we need about 2/3, which is about 356. Likewise, there's another congressional act called Abolish Super PACs, more recent, that was created by the Money Out of Politics movement. And then this year, Representative Joe Neguse of Colorado, down in southern Colorado, has submitted the Citizens Over Corporations Amendment. Again, these 2 other attempts from Congress are just not going to get it done. Congress has got too many Republicans in place, too many that push back to any kind of change that these are going to make. So let me move on. The second thing that's going on, a little more exciting, is up in Maine. In 2024, 2025, there was a question 1 ballot measure. This would limit Super PAC contributions to $5,000. Now, this effort has got some major backing. The main person that's behind it is Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig. He's been fighting and crusading efforts to overturn Citizens United almost since day one, almost since 2010. He, along with another nonprofit called Equal Citizens, has gotten the Maine initiative passed, and actually now it's before some judges in terms of trying to overturn it. For example, there's a federal judge in Maine that ruled that it was unconstitutional and cited current federal appellate precedents. But that's not going to stop them. They're still going, and they're taking it before the Supreme Court sometime before the summer of 2027. We wish them all the luck in them trying to get this through the Supreme Court. The next one I want to talk about is in Hawaii. This is real exciting. This is real recent. Senate Bill 2471, the limit of powers of artificial persons. And this is led by an organization called Transparent Election Initiative. Later today, Sherry Stieg is going to talk about a little bit more about Transparent Election Initiative. But let me say quickly, this is based on the Montana plan and actually is the same thing. It's actually been approved, and now it's actually a matter of getting it implemented. So that's real exciting. Okay, the next one in terms of nationwide effort in terms of constitutional convention. This is where we're really excited because Constitution allows amendments not only by Congress, but by a convention of states. A convention of states can call for a convention. It requires 34 states to all agree to ask for a convention. There have been many, many attempts over the years, over the last 40, 50 years, where states have tried to call for a convention. But every time they get over 20 votes or 20 states, Congress turns around, gets nervous, is afraid they're going to lose their power, and enacts some kind of legislation or some kind of amendment to the Constitution. Here at projectleapfrog.org, we're really excited because we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to get a constitutional convention called that would just make 2 amendments to the Constitution. A lot of times the ones in the past had one particular topic that they were interested in. What sets Project Leapfrog apart from other people is that we are trying to have 2 amendments, and we actually include in our state legislation, we actually include a draft text of the 2 proposed amendments. Now, backing up a little bit, Project Leapfrog has been in existence for 2 years. And actually what we did, we started out with a pilot program where we had 1 legislative liaison in many states. We actually had liaisons in 18 states pushing for our constitutional convention. But what we learned is volunteers for liaisons, and in most cases these were college political science students, they left their liaison position for paid jobs. So as a result of that, we learned that we really need to pay these people, and well as we need to probably have 2 liaisons per state so that they can encourage each other, work together, and actually get legislation passed through the states. We have a comprehensive training program online. It's free to anyone that wants to partake in it. So online on our website, on our page for training, we have about a dozen documents that go through the different phases of what a legislative liaison would do. So we actually train our youth on how to be legislative liaisons, and they will actually become possibly legislators for the state in the future. It's an exciting program we're really proud of. We've tweaked the training program several times, and so we're really excited about it. So what we're doing is we're in the process of having 2 young liaisons in every state capital to encourage legislators to pass our legislation. This will call for a convention to discuss our 2 specific constitutional amendments. What are they? Let me tell you. So the text draft for the amendments are: 1, grant rights to natural persons only and not artificial entities. And secondly, grant rights of campaign finance limits and require full transparency of such. But what's different about our legislation that other people have not attempted is we have a unique abort clause added to our legislation. It says if any other amendments are considered or passed by the convention, then the whole convention is null and void. So there's another organization, this is the 5th thing I was going to talk about, and it's an organization called conventionofstates.org. They've actually been successful in getting 20 states to pass their legislation calling for a convention. So that's pretty exciting, okay? The problem is they have 3 vague amendments that they want to have discussed and passed. One of them has to do with requiring a federal budget, balanced budget. The second one has to do with reducing the size and scope of the federal government. Think Doji. Remember, Doji just laid a ton of people off in the federal government. And then thirdly, set congressional term limits. That's the thing that most people can agree on. But there's nothing in there about an abort clause that would stop them from having other proposed amendments. And so one of the things that Project Leapfrog is doing, and the reason we have the name Project Leapfrog, I'm sure you think it's kind of a funny name, but Project Leapfrog plans to use these same legislatures because ours is a limited because there's only 2 amendments proposed, and it's nonpartisan. In other words, it's supported by everybody, no matter what party, independent, Democrat, Republican, that's in favor of overturning Citizens United and giving the power back to people, back to voters, rather than the corporations, the billionaires, and super PACs. Anyways, we'll be using the same Convention of State Legislatures to pass our state legislation. And then on top of it, we're excited because with the November election coming up, and it looks like a lot of Democrats are going to be sweeping a lot of elections, okay, we want to approach those new, fresh legislators because they have a lot of fresh ideas. We want them to support Project Leapfrog as well. So that's why the name Project Leapfrog, because we're hoping to leap over other people's efforts and get to the finish line. I know it's going to be a lot of work, whatever. At the same time, we know it's not going to be cheap. You know, we've heard of lots of celebrities that are donating, people including Mackenzie Scott that have donated millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars to different charities and stuff. We estimate that our cost will be a total of about $1 million by the time we get done. And so for $28,000 per state, for 34 states, we think we're a bargain. There's another organization out there that we've been running into that we have to warn you about. We have an organization out there called Common Cause. It's huge, nonprofit. And Common Cause has always been afraid that any kind of convention will run away. Well, what's interesting is Cato Institute and YouGov did a survey, and they found that 40% of Americans, this is a really high number, 40% of Americans think it's time to rewrite the US Constitution. So there is a lot of people out there that are talking the conversation about maybe it's time to write the Constitution. We know it's going to be faster to amend it. And that's why we're excited about Project Leapfrog. And so we don't want to, let the Common Cause stop our effort. We're going to keep going no matter what. One of the things we're excited about is in May 2024, Arizona State University held a model constitutional convention. This was a convention that was funded primarily by some wealthy libertarians. Okay, they in turn proposed, I believe, 4 or 5 amendments to the Constitutional Convention that was held at Arizona State. But by the time the convention got done, after a week, with over 100 lawyers and students from around the country, okay, they actually passed 4 other, mostly progressive amendments. One of those was actually the Equal Rights Amendment. So I'm excited because of that model convention having been so successful in coming up with 4 amendments. We believe once our convention passes our 2 amendments, the floodgates will suddenly fly open. People will be going out and rushing to do the same thing. We believe it'll be exciting for people that are trying to amend the Constitution to get reproductive rights finally put into the Constitution, healthcare rights for everybody, universal healthcare is what some people call it, into the Constitution, as well as voting rights, putting it back into the Constitution and undo the damage Supreme Court did recently. So, in summary, there are many, many paths to get Citizens United overturned, and I hope you will look and join some of these organizations to make it happy. And the key to all this is I want to tell you is that there is hope. There's a lot of hope. It's going to take some work, but we're actually going to make the change and get our democracy back. We're going to fix the democracy, and we're going to get voters in charge again instead of corporations, billionaires, and super PACs. So thanks, Tiffany, for the opportunity to talk to everybody today.
You're very welcome. Sherry, do you want to hop on?
So one of the strategies mentioned in Mike's presentation has been spearheaded by the Transparent Election Organization, which I will refer to as TEI, Transparent Election Initiative. It is based on the long-established legal premise that corporations and other artificial persons, that's any of these entities that aren't breathing human beings, are chartered by states. And therefore, it is each state that establishes the powers and privileges for artificial entities to operate within the state. Most states, including Colorado, include a legal provision within their statutes applicable to corporations that said the states may change what corporations may do at any time. As Mike mentioned, legislators in Hawaii, with the assistance of TEI, were able to pass legislation that removed political spending power from powers artificial entities, such as corporations, have if they wish to be chartered or operated in Hawaii. Political spending power is defined very broadly as the legal capacity to expend money or anything of value to influence artificial entities, value to influence the outcome of a vote of the electorate. So it's very broad. A state's removal of political spending power from artificial entities makes the Citizens United decision irrelevant. You don't have to overturn it, it just becomes irrelevant. Legislators in other states, such as California and Colorado, have expressed an interest in passing similar legislation, and TEI continues to work with these state legislators. Unfortunately, except for Hawaii, legislation to remove political spending power of artificial persons gets stalled when dark money entities pressure legislators. So even though TEI will continue to work with any legislators who want to try to get this passed, it makes no sense to put all their eggs in a basket that has considerably less chance of getting through than the citizens' initiatives. Accordingly, oh, and by the way, anything that's passed, whether it's the Hawaii statutory changes or initiatives, dark money is going to fight it all the way. Misinformation, court cases, and then everybody knows all of this is going to end up in the Supreme Court. That said, the approach being taken by TEI has been established law forever and ever. States have the power to charter and determine the powers of any of these artificial entities. So TEI is working with citizens and pro-democracy groups to put initiatives on ballots. Montana is the first state to successfully do this, and they did it with an all-volunteer signature gathering effort. And they didn't have much time to do it because, of course, there were many court challenges. And then when they finally had time to go, there was a very short period of time to get the signatures. Nobody believed it could be done, but they exceeded everyone's expectation. The TEI volunteers in Montana are now doing a full court press to counteract the huge spending and misinformation put forth by dark money so that the initiative will pass. The great news is that 75 to 80% of voters across the political spectrum, and I mean across the political spectrum, I was trying to get signatures in some of the reddest part of red Montana, and you can get it as long as you have, you can talk to people and actually get them to listen and not listen to all the misinformation they've been given. Anyway, 75 to 80% of all voters across the political spectrum want dark money out of politics. So the ballot measures of this type will likely pass. The key is to have a large, well-organized army of grassroots volunteers who start by educating their neighbors ahead of the onslaught of dark money, and then keep reaching out to their friends and neighbors to counteract the misinformation while signatures are being gathered, and then leading up to voting day. The other great news is that there are efforts in all states, as far as I can tell, most states, I think all of them, when I looked at the map before I started this presentation, to either pass legislation or get initiatives on the ballot. Of course, some efforts are farther along than others. And aside from Montana and Hawaii, Colorado is one of the states farthest along. The next opportunity to get an initiative on the ballot in Colorado is in 2028, and we are starting to organize now. So if you or anyone else you know may want to be involved in the effort to put the initiative on the Colorado ballot in 2028, you may sign up at co, as in Colorado, co.transparentelection.org. I'll put, when I'm done speaking, I'll put a link in the chat where people who want to get involved may sign up. And of course, Tiffany will include it in her follow-up notes. When you sign in, you can indicate what level of involvement you might be interested in. That could be anything from, hey, I just want to hear what's going on, or I might want to help gather in signatures, or I have a desire to try and be a team lead. We are having an organizational call, nationwide, an organizational call on September 9 at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And people who sign up on that site that I just gave you will be sent a link on where to register for the call. Between now and when we begin gathering signatures in 2027, there is a lot of things we can do. We are looking for organizations and businesses and others to endorse the measure and or who might be willing to coordinate grassroots efforts, and most importantly, education. That is the key. As I said, voters want this. The problem is outside groups make it confusing. And having dealt with it in Montana, nobody says, hey, I'm a dark money group. One of the most effective things was big business, the oil, the gas, the utilities, and all of those entities, mining, whatever, that have at various times interfered in, actually back in early Montana history, they had interference, and Montana passed the first law, and they did it by citizens' initiative, to say that big corporations could not influence elections. But the way they did it in Montana is all these groups had the Chamber of Commerce act as their shill. I mean, you could tell who wrote the letters to the editor and what they were saying. I can't even, it's a transparent election initiative. Somebody just asked, what does TEI mean? In any event, people, were saying, oh my gosh, the Chamber of Commerce says this is a bad thing. So it's important to get out ahead of it, of all this stuff. So so if you have suggestions for organizations we should be reaching out to, let me know. More importantly, it's important that we seek, train, organize volunteers. Volunteers will be needed, of course, for grassroots signature gathering. But again, as I said, even before that, they will be able to help educate friends, neighbors, and voters ahead of the onslaught of dark money misinformation. And that is extremely important. I want to share one tactic that was used very effectively, not just in Montana, but in, frankly, in Colorado, trying to get something passed. So what big money interests, besides hiding behind people that look like your neighbor or sound like your neighbor, they come out and they say, oh, we're all for this. However, it's flawed. And they don't want to specifically say how it's flawed, or they just throw up a bunch of stuff. But one of the ways they say it's flawed is this legislation does not take care of billionaire donations. And the point, I mean, everybody goes, oh, billionaires out, billionaires out. And it's a really good thing, it sounds like. However, individuals, billionaires or not, have always been able to contribute. You know, Citizens United did not change that. So, to say we want to make Citizens United irrelevant does not give billionaires an advantage. More importantly, most of these billionaires hide behind 501c4 organizations that sound really good. They don't, I mean, the times when you actually knew or voters knew it was Elon Musk behind something, oh, they weren't tricked. Hey, we're not going to do Elon Musk, but if it's Citizens for Equality or whatever, which who knows what that is, they're going to get involved. The other important thing, and the beauty of this is when lobbyists and dark money talk about, oh, well, you shouldn't do this because it doesn't cover billionaires. The beauty of it is it can't. All these initiatives have to have only one subject. So if you're trying to stop artificial entities and somehow control donations by individuals, it's already two. You're automatically going to get kicked out, and the dark money and lobbyists win. But it's important to get ahead of this because they hear this stuff and it sounds plausible, and then people are afraid that they're getting snookered again when you ask them to sign on to the initiative.
The first question is Kim said she heard the other day that the size of our government is no larger than in the early 60s. Excuse me. So while she's not researched it, has Project Leapfrog researched it or looked into this at all?
Yeah, I think there was an answer follow-up. Somebody, I think Tiffany actually put something on the chat that showed that government has actually grown since then in terms of expenses. And as we know, I
About
think we hit a record deficit, right?
Yeah, I didn't look into the deficit, but the fiscal year spending. So first of all, in 1960, if you adjust it for inflation, government spending was between 950 billion and $1 trillion. And in 2025, our government spent $7 trillion. So it's 7 times, we've spent more than 7 times the amount of money that we did in the 1960s. But Sousa just said maybe they were talking about the number of representatives that we have, and that I don't know the answer to.
I put in the chat that Mark Twain said there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. This is one of those things that it really depends on how you count. After Doge fired everybody, it may be that there are fewer bureaucrats in the government, or they may be counting something in a way that isn't the money, isn't the people, isn't the size, because they cut so much out of it. Without knowing more about it, I can't say for sure, but there are lots of ways that people can make claims like the government is the same size as it was in the 60s. If you're taking a narrow slice to look at it, that wouldn't be kind of what we're talking about.
So as far as workers, jobs, whole agencies that we rely on were cut by Doge. As far as money, no. All along, if you looked at the numbers, what the government was spending and the current administration always has been higher than even the fourth year of the Biden administration. And it's continued to go up, and our national debt has hit some huge astronomical number that nobody's ever seen before. And of course, we don't even know what the real numbers are. So
I wanted, before we get to the other questions, I wanted to at least state out loud something that Mike put in the chat, because a lot of people are asking about how does legislation amend the Constitution. And it sounds like we have to have 34 states who must approve state legislation asking for a constitutional convention to take place. And then at that convention, 38 states must approve any amendments, and that's how they get ratified. Did I get that right?
Slightly different. So 34 states approve the legislation, so the convention is called. And then once the convention, which in most cases will have 2 representatives from every state, the 100 people vote. And once it passes from there, then it goes back to the states, and 38 states have to approve, because the wording could be totally different than the draft. So they have to
Okay.
have 38 states then bless it after the fact.
Okay.
And then what did Hawaii do to get it passed?
So what we have to do is we have to convince legislatures to pass our legislation that calls for the convention. So that's why we've decided our best path is to have 2 liaisons in every state. And I'm trying to, in as many states as possible, I figure we'll have about 13 states where we have 2 representatives that will be liaisons. We'll be trying to get legislatures to approve our bill.
I think that person in particular was asking, like, what did Hawaii do to get their legislation that they already. So maybe let me clarify from my own head. The legislation that passed in Hawaii, was that something local to basically overturn the effects of Citizens United in Hawaii? Or was that the Project Leapfrog legislation to call for the convention?
that what that was is uh legislators in Hawaii, just like there's certain legislators in Colorado and California, want to do this. But of course, there's lots of people that, or lots of legislators that rely on this money or whatever, and then they get stuck. It was able to pass in Hawaii, uh, and it's the same as what's going through in Montana, except for Montana's having to do it by initiative. And Hawaii is fairly unique. It is, I mean, the population is as blue as you get. It's a small state. It's not like um, a small state as you can easily reach your population. In a state, say, like Montana, it's so spread out, and it's just a big target for this dark money because they can buy. I mean, every state has the same number of senators, and you can buy a senator in Montana for a lot less than you can buy, say, California. So it's just a unique area. I mean, that said, you can always hope that a legislature will have enough people um, willing to vote in favor of this legislation, but nobody's counting on it. And that's why TEI is always doing a 2-prong. Even if the state legislature is going to go through it, they always want to also do an initiative, because you can count on the people to vote for it if you get it before them.
Yes,
Okay.
if I can add, Sherry. Basically, so Hawaii, what they did was a local state-only bill that would change the laws within Hawaii for corporations and people that are doing campaign finances. But if a corporation was created in New Jersey, for example, the Hawaiian law would not apply to them, right? Unless they spent money in Hawaii. Is that correct?
Well, so I have not personally read the legislation in Hawaii. That said, because I know it was, drafted in conjunction with TEI and everything else. I am 99% sure that it's the same way as what TEI is trying to do in Montana. What it says is states control chartering, but they also have control over any entity, quote unquote, doing business in the state. So if they own property, but merely by putting money into a state election, that would be enough to tie them to the state. And so the state would have jurisdiction over them. And that's how it works. Obviously, this is, so the legislation, similar as the initiative Montana, applies to dark money, even dark money by entities chartered outside of the state. But it works because it at least you can't buy your state legislators. But the best way to do it again is to get every state to do it. And there are efforts, when I looked on the TEI map, there are efforts in all states, but some of them are just, kind of looking at it. And other states like Colorado are ready to move forward.
Yeah, so if I can add, so the good news about the Transparent Election Initiative is that with either a state legislature passing a bill or with a state ballot initiative that the citizens pass, basically you take the dark money away in that state. So unfortunately, you have to pass this in all 50 states. And that's kind of what's exciting because Maine is coming at it from a super PAC standpoint, and Hawaii and TEI are coming primarily from a corporation side of things. So it's really exciting. The states are getting involved and we just need all efforts. Hitting everything from all directions is really what we need to do to conquer this.
When I was talking about how the TEI legislation or initiatives, well, it's just the initiatives. Legislators can do whatever they want. But on initiatives, you can't lump in, super PAC, you can't lump in billionaires. However, by initiative, you can do them in a different one. So TEI, is focusing on where the biggest bulk of the money is coming in, and more importantly, it's the lack of transparency. In PACs and things like that, there are disclosures. The problem is if the PAC discloses that they've got money from good voters, who knows what good vote, it's just a name, you don't know what's behind it. But it certainly doesn't stop other initiatives for dealing with some of the other problems we see.
Okay, the next question is actually mine. You know what? Go ahead, Jeanette. Ask your question.
Thank you. I thank you both for addressing Citizens United. It really has gotten lost for some of us in the fray of everything going on, and it's so critical. I guess I'd like both of you to address what is for me a decades-long reality that the conservative movements in the country have wanted a constitutional convention for decades. I mean, the Christian nationalist movement, the evangelical movement, the far right movements, they have been working, the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, these are all folks who have been working solidly together to get a constitutional convention, and they've been preparing for it forever. Plus, as one of our speakers was saying, we've got a Supreme Court now that everything's going to land in their lap. It does not favor progressive causes. So unless we really get, and that's why the state by state initiative holds some promise, but unless we get conservatives and progressives and everybody across a broad spectrum working on this, I think the radical right is way more prepared than most of the folks I know for a constitutional convention. So it makes me really nervous when I hear people say, well, we've just started working on this for a year or two, and we'd like to do this. And I'm thinking, these folks have been working on this for decades, and they will be thrilled if people come up with a constitutional convention where they can throw out all kinds of ideas they've been waiting to produce for years. So if either of you or both of you could address that concern, I'd really appreciate it.
I'd like to respond to that. So my best hope is when I mentioned the Arizona State University Model Constitutional Convention, and like I said, it was actually funded by libertarian money, so which was rather a conservative uh, organization. And what happened was most of the amendments that came out of it were progressive. So the libertarians had plenty of opportunity to try to tweak or sway or whatever the people at the ASU Model Constitutional Convention. But the people, and I think the average age was actually fairly young because these are mostly college students that were participating. And so it was exciting to see that they, in terms of passing things through, were actually interested in progressive causes. You're right. There's been a long history of conservatives been pushing for a convention, mostly along the lines of the balanced budget amendment. And that's one of the things that conventionofstates.org is actually pushing for in their proposed convention. But I see the young people actually having a bigger influence than in the past. And that's why it's kind of exciting because this year we're seeing a lot of younger candidates. And this November, we could end up with a lot younger base of senators and representatives. And so I think at the state level, we're seeing the same thing. And what that means is that there'll be a lot more younger people involved in any kind of convention that comes about. So I'm still
what? But I was going to ask actually the same question or something similar to it. With it being voted on by the states, and even the smaller states, the Republican states are outnumbering the Democratic states by quite a lot. What are the risks involved in calling for a constitutional convention like that? At the very least, I could see where many of the things that we want would either get voted down or just not be included, at the risk of including things like an anti-abortion amendment or balanced budget amendment.
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of the congressmen are older people, and that's what's frustrating a lot of the young generation. And they've been avoiding politics and voting altogether in the past. But this year, there seems to be a huge resurgence of young people's involvement. I just put in the chat the link to the ASU Model Constitutional Convention, and on there's a video you can click on and watch the video. And I think you'll be really impressed with the young attitudes of the young lawyers and political science students that participated in that. There was 100 of them participating and voting for the 4 amendments. And I think it actually mentions what the 4 were. One of them was the Equal Rights Amendment.
Mike, just in response, Arizona State, I mean, some of the most progressive news comes out of that. I mean, they work with PBS, they work with other places. And the fact that it was a young audience does not dissuade me at all from my concern about if you did this at Lynchburg and Falwell Nation at their college, you may get a bunch of libertarians, but you're going to get a very different outcome. So where you have this, that's why Montana was interesting, because they probably had a different audience. But I'm just cautioning, kind of like Morgan was saying, if this has to go to the Supreme Court, we do not have a favorable Supreme Court. And these are all going to go to the Supreme Court. Nobody's going to pass anything right now without it going to that court. So yes, you're right, Morgan, the kinds of amendments that they have been chomping at the bit to get a hold of in a constitutional convention are things like anti-abortion, anti-trans, anti-immigrant, they've got a whole list as long as their arm. that they've been working to get passed. So I don't want to discourage people who want to encourage young people to be running, and some are winning and more are getting involved. But I think it is very premature to assume that those folks will have us beat the folks who've been working on this for decades at a constitutional convention. I think that is not realistic at this point.
I think we could talk about a constitutional convention for a long, long time. But there are, risks and pros and cons involved, and I would like to get to a few other questions without going down a deep, dark rabbit hole on this. But Jeanette, I hear what you're saying, and I personally agree. But there is a point that to really get the money out of politics and overturn Citizens United, a constitutional convention is a quick and easy path to that without needing to go through legislators and the courts. Somebody said that clerkandrecorder.org is a group that might be interesting to you, and put a link in the chat. And then somebody said, where does the dark money originate? And would it be best to take them down from the top?
So the answer to that question is, who knows? I mean, that's why it's called dark money. You do not know where it's coming from, because it's hidden. They go under the names that sound great, like, I don't know.
One here is what is it? Advanced Colorado. So they are an out-of-state group pouring, I believe it's billions into our state for ballot initiatives, like citizen-led ballot initiatives. Like when you see those guys out there with 20 different petitions and they want you to sign all of them and they all sound great, that's Advanced Colorado. So I just put a link to an article in the chat about them.
And
But they're an example of dark money.
And I'll just give you an example from, Montana. So Montana just had their primary elections, and there's an independent running, but obviously not part of the primary. But there was a candidate that had raised under 20 grand altogether. She probably, I think maybe he only had like 10 grand. But anyway, it's some ridiculous amount. So she could do absolutely nothing. And just before the primary, some money came in and dumped millions into ads, pro her, and negative. These were candidates in the Democratic primary, pro her and negative the longtime Democrat, was, and nobody could figure out who, where, by the time they, I mean, still don't know. And as a result, the candidate that raised 20 grand is now sticking in the race. She obviously cannot raise any money because she had nothing to do with this dark money. They're not going to put any more money from her for her, and it has made it an automatic that the Republican will win. End of story. Otherwise, the independent and the Republican were equal. So that's what happens. And nobody knows who it was. I mean, it's clearly nobody in the state, and it clearly wasn't anybody. So, who knows?
Okay, Aaron, what's your question?
Hey, Sherry, Mike, thank you so much. I'm sorry if you already touched on this, but what do you think that changing the filibuster and extending the Supreme Court would do to help causes like this? Are you in support of that or not?
Do you want me to go first, Mike, or do you want to go?
Go ahead, Sherry.
So I don't know. I mean, candidly, at this point, I feel like it's incredibly difficult to do anything through Congress or your legislators because whatever you want, there's some dark money that wants something different. And they, that money always wins. And so that is what caused me to get involved in this effort because, I mean, I'll just say I listened to Pete Buttigieg in Montana, who endorsed the Montana initiative. And he went through this whole list of things where he said, don't think you're alone. And then he goes through things that, I mean, there must have been 20 different things that 80% or more of voters nationwide want. And he said, so why don't we ever get this? And the answer is because somebody buys your legislator before, or enough of them that you never can get it passed. So this is one of the things where citizens actually can do things. We don't care what your legislators do. This will pass. I mean, even in, red Montana, people are almost positive that it's going to pass. And that's in red Montana. In other states, it's going to be a lot easier because everybody wants dark money out, but you can't get it out because somebody buys your congressman or whatever. And that's, going back to the filibuster. I mean, again, you have to get them to agree what the voters want. And they don't. But if you can go back to where there isn't this flood of money, you're only dealing with the billionaires, and you will actually know who the billionaires are. You can then get past all these other things that people want, including term limits, or if not, term limits, add. Pete Buttigieg came up with some, really good ideas about how you add, each administration gets to add one or two or whatever. And there are ways to do it if you can just get dark money out. Otherwise, I hate what they've done with the filibuster, because what makes me so incredibly angry is, Cinema and Manchin said, oh, we got to protect this filibuster. But what they're protecting is not the original filibuster. The original filibuster is, if you want to talk, you stand there and talk. And now what this is all you have is the minority, which it's mostly, it's progressives that are trying to pass things. The other people don't want to pass things. So every time something good goes through that voters want, then the minority can just say, hey, we filibuster, and they go home and talk to their constituents, while the majority sits there, in Congress and can't move.
Yeah, the current filibuster is not like historically a long thing. It's very recent, and it's not necessary for our way of life.
Right. But again, it's not citizens or voters that tell these people, oh, stick by the filibuster. Nobody's wanting that, but you can't get them to listen to you because of all this other stuff.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so two things. One is that my hope is that once we get through the Constitutional Convention process and this works and we are able to change the Constitution in terms of rights of people only and rights of campaign finance limits, then that'll open the floodgates, and there'll be other attempts to have a convention with an abort clause and a limited convention that's nonpartisan. And I think that's when you'll have things like not only reproductive rights, but then you'll have one that will redo the Supreme Court. I suspect what will happen is in 2029, after we've had 2 elections and Democrats get more people into the House and the Senate, I think they will attempt to, if not impeach some people in the Trump administration, but they may try to get rid of some Supreme Court judges. I don't know if that's really going to be successful or not, but I think there's going to be an attempt at that point in time. But anyways, there's a lot of people that want to have, there's been several ideas, but the main one, I believe, is to have limited terms for Supreme Court justices and have a rotating election, or if you will, assignment where presidents get equal opportunity to assign the new Supreme Court justices. So it'd be a rotating basis. And so therefore, even if you have a Democrat in office for a couple of terms or a Republican for a couple of terms, there would still be new people that would be floating through the system in the office. So there's some people that have more details than I do, but that's, I think the best thing that's going to happen is I think there will be an attempt in 2029, but I don't know that it'll be successful. And I'm hoping that our convention process will be. And the thing I put on the side, that one gal thought that Arizona was kind of democratic. My understanding is the ASU Model Constitution Convention had students from 35 states. So it wasn't just Arizona students. It wasn't just 100 Arizona students. It was students from all over the country. But yeah, they were probably mostly young because most people in college are young people. So it did have a young bias. Whereas an actual convention could be stocked with 2 people from the local state that might have been long-term legislators. So they may be in their 60s or 70s. But I'm still optimistic that we have to go through this process and people want change.
The next question, is there a book or a long, peer-reviewed article that would help understand the various ways that we could push this through?
I don't know of any particular article. I think today's opportunity to speak to everybody is really the first time that I think anybody has encapsulated all the different efforts that are going on. And so I praise Tiffany and Solidarity Warriors for giving me a chance to kind of cover that in a 1-hour time frame and actually talk about all the different things going on, because each little effort has got its own supporters and its own little niche where they're pushing for their thing, and they're not really looking at all the different options and all the different opportunities that we have for fixing our broken democracy. And so I really appreciate this opportunity.
So I have to, there isn't, I don't know of any one, shopping place for all of it. I can tell you that if you go to the co.transparentelection.org website, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a box that says brought to you by Transparent Election Initiative. If you click on that, that will take you to the transparent, the main, one for Montana and everything. There is an abundance of information you could ever want on TEI's effort to make the Supreme Court Citizens United irrelevant. So it does explain in, great detail on, obviously with our Supreme Court now, and I'm trained as a lawyer and so are a lot of my friends, and we've come to the conclusion they're just making up stuff. But aside from making up stuff, the truth of the matter is there has been no decisions saying that states do not have the total power to or total authority to determine the powers of artificial entities. So again, they would have to totally make it out of whole cloth, because there is absolutely nothing in the whole history of U.S. law that would say that states don't have these powers.
Okay. The next question I think actually is directed to me. And it's what is the problem with a balanced budget amendment? From my perspective, it's very much like the voter ID amendments that on the face of it, the title of it sounds like something everybody get behind. It makes perfect sense. But when you dig into it a little bit, there are some really big problems. The first is the whole reason to constrain government and government spending is a Republican idea that they don't want government taking their taxes and being able to pass legislation that they don't like. So a balanced budget amendment is one way that they see that they can shrink government and limit its ability to do what government is supposed to do. But beyond that, when you force a balanced budget, you run into a situation like we're seeing here in Colorado, where normally taxes would be plenty enough to fund our budget and our programs and everything the legislature has passed. But because there is a balanced budget amendment, then that doesn't happen. And we wind up running these huge deficits when our tax base can cover it. But we are forced to give money back to citizens instead of being able to use that to fund our government. So it creates deficits and problems for state governments that normally wouldn't be there and would hamper their ability to solve the problems that people have. So to me, it's not doing what it's being sold as and not what is on the face of it. And it's causing harm to government and people as a consequence. So that would be my answer to why I wouldn't want a balanced budget amendment. And I've seen this happen in other states as well. Did either of you want to say something beyond that? Oh, okay.
I can't do it.
How can you tell if they're talking, if somebody's talking about dark money? How can you tell something is coming from dark money?
The way dark money works is anybody, billionaires, corporations, PACs, whatever, can give money to super PACs. The super PACs do not have to disclose who their donors are. And so that's when it becomes dark money. So the super PACs then can run wild and go anywhere and give that money to any politician they want to at any time without having to disclose who the source is. They do have to, in some places, disclose how much money they give, but it's a total, if you will, market basket of donations from a bunch of other different people. So all you see is the total amount of money that they spend on a particular candidate or legislative bill.
So I would say it's somewhat different. I would say dark money is any time where you don't have a disclosure with a breathing person's name. Otherwise, you don't know who's behind a corporation. You don't know who's behind a 501c4. You know, so I mean, I've even been annoyed when I've done all sorts of research to find a great charity. I think I'm just, I'm donating to, feed kids. And then someplace along the line, I see that, somehow they've figured out a way to support some cause that I hate. So it would be really nice if it was never any of these artificial entities. So for example, if 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 well, I'll give you an example. Sometimes things come up in the discussions here during our discussions in Solidarity Warriors. If I want to support a cause or I want to support a candidate, I just donate directly. And there's my name. They know it's me. I don't appear as anything other than me.
So one of the things I do at the bottom of every ad, whether it's a print ad, a radio ad, a TV ad, by law, it's required to disclose who's paying for that ad. And if you're talking about something that's not dark money, usually, like Sherry said, people are donating directly to the candidate. So if the end of it, it says candidate, paid for by citizens for candidate A, that's as light money as things kind of get. But if it's some organization that you have never heard of that has nothing to do with the candidate or even the subject that they're talking about, that can be an indicator that you're talking about that's coming from dark money. And that's just one example. There's a lot of other dark money out there. So the next question is, I thought that we don't need laws to expand the Supreme Court. Is that true? And I think they're referring to when Roosevelt expanded the court, but that was a long time ago, and I think it's changed.
Yes. There's lots of different ways you could change. You could change it by Congress acting, you could change it by constitutional amendments, but there isn't anything in the Constitution that says you have to have 9 Supreme Court justices. So that would be possible to change. But someone has to act, and I'm fairly certain that if somebody tried to do it by executive order, that there actually would be court challenges filed, and that would be something that the Supreme Court would say doesn't work. They kind of fight their power.
Sherry, I completely agree with your optimism about things working and legislation passing and how things are supposed to go and whether anything is going to get through and change. I've said it a bunch of times, and I couldn't agree with you more. Like I'm coming from the same place, and I get it.
Unless the citizens are in control of it. And I will tell you, it's kind of interesting that even again, Red Montana passed an abortion rights act by citizens initiative. You could never have gotten it through their legislation, and their legislators, tried to change it after it was passed. Kansas just did something like that too. Passed something. Oh, yeah, their legislature put on an initiative to make it harder to do citizens initiative, and there was another one like that, and those went down 80% and 90% against. So that's why unfortunately right now we have to try and do things by initiative. But I think we have a better shot once we get this huge dark money out. We have a better shot of having congressmen listen to us.
I lived in Missouri for a long time. They just voted down one of the amendments to make ballot initiatives harder. And all of the time I lived there, I watched time after time ballot initiatives get passed with, essentially very progressive ideas that would never pass through the legislature. And without ballot initiatives, it's another way for them to seize control and prevent the things that the people want from getting through. The next question is, can states limit corporate charters?
Absolutely. I mean, they're the ones that, so, well, okay, let me start over. They don't limit, if you're talking about, they don't determine a corporation's charter. That's certain, that's your shareholders or whatever. But if you're talking about, do they determine what kinds of entities may be chartered in the state, what kinds of entities may do business in the state, what powers they have, um, you know, certainly anything that they're allowed to hide behind that corporate shield, which is, of course, the other reason, billionaires aren't, they don't have a corporate shield like, like 501c4s and regular corporations.
And then the last question I have is crypto a whole new way for people to use dark money?
It just gives you more options to come up with the dark money. So it's like more, more money that the dark money interest can use.
And I mean, this is something I know a little bit about. They're parallel but slightly different. Cryptocurrencies are not traceable back to a specific person. And the purpose is to supplant government currencies and international currencies with one thing that can go anywhere and can't be tracked. But if you were to take a cryptocurrency and give it as dark money through a third organization, that wouldn't be any different than giving the money direct. If there's something that's being tracked, if you're giving money to a candidate and your name needs to be attached to the dollar figure for the check that you write, it may be possible to give an anonymous cryptocurrency donation on top of that. But cryptocurrency by itself doesn't enable more dark money differently than giving dark money cash would. I hope that answers the question. Jeanette. Michelle asked how many farmers are on our side. And, I haven't heard any statistics on it, but I get the sense that, like many other groups, like the military, veterans, even fiscal conservatives that came into this thinking that they were Republicans and that the Republicans were on their side, are starting to realize maybe they're not, particularly when it came to tariffs and the way it's really hit farmers almost disproportionately to anybody besides car makers and steel. I sense that there's a little bit of shifting. At least, they're not going to become Democrats overnight, but they're going to be a lot less comfortable being Republicans than they have been. So, I think when you ask how many people are necessary for our living that recognize our financial power, I think it's going to be little bits and pieces. I think it's going to be a little over here, a little over there, and when you put it all together, it's going to be a critical mass. And this is why I think it's so important for us to be careful about welcoming people in who have different ideas, because there are going to be pillars of support, and there are going to be people that are leaving uh, the the support of MAGA and the administration. But if we're taking positions that they can't come along with, even for a single issue, like stopping the fascists and taking over, um, then it's going to weaken our movement, and it's going to make us harder to reach that critical mass. So even though we talk about all kinds of things that, maybe progressive and out there and may not appeal to everybody, as a movement, we need to be prepared when the law enforcement effects, when evangelical Christians effect, because we're going to need a movement so large that we can't do it without parts of all of these different groups. So I think to be successful, we just need to take that approach. And I think expecting somebody to realize that their financial interests in the question is going to be enough to motivate change is missing something very important. Because I think a lot of the people that have been supporting Republicans and supporting this administration do so because they identify as who they are as Republican, and the issues that make people Republican don't matter anymore. Once people think they're Republican before they're American, before anything else, it doesn't matter how much you take away, how much they don't get Medicaid, how much they don't get SNAP, how much they don't get basic health care. They're going to vote Republican anyway. And that is where change needs to happen. And they need to realize that, oh, being Republican isn't helping me, it's hurting me. And that's where the change is going to take place. And as this administration continues to hurt the people, particularly in the red states who are on SNAP and on Medicaid and on all of these government programs that red states are disproportionately benefiting from, that's when we'll start to see the change that we need. So I hope that answers your question.
Let's not forget, Morgan, that a lot of these rollbacks started during Democrat administrations. So this is all sides are guilty.
I will not defend the Democrats for what they have been doing. They, as far as I am concerned, have sold out the working class when they were getting outraised by Republicans. And Bill Clinton decided there would be a third way where we could be socially liberal and fiscally conservative, and started trying to get as much money and raise as much money from billionaires as the Republicans did, so that in their mind, the Democrats would have a better chance of winning elections. But what it did was destroy the working class base that didn't have the money to influence anything. Therefore, the Democrats stopped representing them and started representing the interests of the people who were donating money. And that's not going to get us to where we need to be either. But we just need to keep these things in mind as we're building a movement that will actually make change. Well, and like Mike said, share this with your fellow activists. Let them know. Go to our YouTube channel, like our videos, leave comments. Things that move the algorithm so that more people see us and we can more effectively build that movement till we're able to make change. That's why we say protests aren't enough. Look at the protests we've done. There hasn't been meaningful change in the administration because of it, but it started building a movement that more people in more protests have been getting off the couch and getting in the streets. And that's what we have to do. And when that's how change is going to happen. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week.